A white officer commits an act of arrogance by arresting a black general from the army, but karma returns with a devastating force that no one could have foreseen. What happens when an act of abuse of power transforms into a life lesson? The story of Jake McAllister and Marcus Steele serves as a powerful reminder that the consequences of our actions can be devastating, but they can also pave the way for redemption and change. Jake McAllister, a 38-year-old police officer from Richmond, Virginia, carries the weight of a past filled with expectations. The son of a law enforcement officer, he grew up in an environment where justice was seen as an unyielding rigidity. The traditional view he inherited shaped his perspective on the world, leading him to believe that order and discipline are essential for society. However, this belief intertwines with deep-seated prejudices that he is unwilling to confront. Amid a tumultuous divorce and increasing work pressure, Jake finds himself in a desperate quest for validation. His need to restore trust and status leads him to a controversial arrest, where he encounters General Marcus Steele. Marcus Steele, a respected 45-year-old general, is a symbol of success and resilience. Born in Baltimore, he overcame immense challenges to excel in the United States Armed Forces. With a brilliant career and a reputation built on integrity, Steele fights daily against the weight of systemic racism that permeates society. The paths of Steele and McAllister cross on a fateful night when he is approached in a hostile manner by Jake, who does not recognize his status. Tension escalates and a simple interaction transforms into a public humiliation that will trigger a series of events that change both their lives. As the environment around them becomes increasingly hostile, Steele's arrest sparks a storm on social media, revealing the fragility of McAllister's power. The consequences of his actions begin to unfold, and public pressure transforms into a movement for justice. Despite the humiliation, Steele chooses to fight through legal means, while McAllister finds himself sinking into a sea of criticism and despair. Steele's struggle is not only for his dignity, but also for systemic changes that benefit his community. In contrast, McAllister's journey becomes a painful process of self-discovery, where he is forced to confront his own prejudices and flaws. What began as an act of abuse of power transforms into a deep reflection on morality and justice. As the trial approaches, Jake McAllister's life crumbles while Marcus Steele rises stronger, determined to make a difference. The story reveals that true strength does not lie solely in a position of power, but in resilience in the face of adversity and the pursuit of justice. The conclusion of this narrative is not merely about one man's downfall, but about the triumph of dignity and the fight for equality. The lesson is clear. Abuse of power can have devastating consequences, but the struggle for justice always prevails. Jake McAllister was facing an emotional and physical whirlwind following Marcus Steele's arrest. The pressure from the media and public outrage not only tarnished his reputation, but also left him in a state of vulnerability he had never experienced before. Messages of support for Steele and protests demanding justice echoed in his mind as he tried to justify his actions. What had begun as a quest for validation was now turning into a nightmare, and the reality of his abuse of power haunted him. Day by day, Jake felt more isolated. His colleagues, who once respected him, now looked at him with disdain. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, but the calls were only from journalists and critics, not friends. He felt like a pariah, and that loneliness consumed him. He tried to distract himself with work, but the weight of guilt and shame prevented him from focusing. The images of Steele, dignified and advocating for his freedom, haunted him. The general was not just a victim, he had become a symbol of resistance. Meanwhile, Marcus Steele faced his own challenges. The support he received from the community was motivating, but the pressure to represent a larger struggle weighed heavily on his shoulders. He knew he was not just fighting for himself, but for all those who faced discrimination and injustice daily. With every public statement he made, he felt the responsibility to convey the right message and inspire others to stand against prejudice. Steele had a team of lawyers by his side, but he also had the support of friends and activists who believed in the cause. Among them was Jessica, a childhood friend who had become a civil rights advocate. Her passion and determination were contagious, and Steele felt empowered by her presence. As the days passed, Jake felt increasingly cornered. The pressure from his personal life was also mounting. The divorce was dragging on, and his ex-wife Sarah was determined to expose his failures as a father and a police officer. She frequently reminded Jake that what he had done was not just a stain on his career, but a betrayal of the values he had promised to uphold. Her words were like blades, cutting into his already fragile self-esteem. With each conversation, Jake found himself drifting further away from his children, who now viewed their father in a new light. He wondered if he could still be a role model, or if his choices had condemned him to be an example of what not to be. The emotional difficulties began to take a toll on his physical health. Jake started experiencing insomnia. His eating habits became irregular, and he felt constantly exhausted. Stress manifested itself in headaches and a constant irritation that pushed him further away from the people around him. In an attempt to escape this reality, he began frequenting a local bar, where he let himself be carried away by alcohol. It was a space where he could lose himself in his thoughts and, for a few hours, forget his responsibilities. But the more he sank into alcohol, the further he drifted from solving his problems. The situation reached a critical point when, on a particularly dark night, Jake ran into an old friend, Tom, a former colleague who had left the police force after traumatic experiences. Tom, seeing Jake, grew concerned about his state. He didn't hesitate to confront him, asking about his health and choices. Jake, filled with anger and shame, reacted defensively, but deep down he knew Tom was right. This conversation was a turning point, forcing Jake to reflect on the direction his life had taken. Meanwhile, Steele's struggle continued to gain momentum. With each step, he became more aware of the injustices surrounding him. With Jessica's support, he began attending community meetings, where they discussed ways to combat racism and discrimination. With every story he heard, his determination grew, and he felt increasingly connected to his cause. It was a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in. The conflict between Jake and Marcus intensified, not only on a personal level, but also as a reflection of the divisions in society. Jake was nearing a breaking point, while Steele was becoming a leader in his community. Their lives were intertwined in a way Jake could never have predicted. One man's fight for justice was about to confront another's desire to reclaim his dignity, and both would need to face their deepest and most painful truths. Jake McAllister found himself trapped in a vicious cycle of self-destruction. With every drink, he tried to silence the voice of guilt echoing in his mind. The bar became a temporary refuge, but the momentary euphoria quickly turned into a deeper emptiness. The laughter and conversations around him felt distant, as if he were watching a movie in which he didn't belong. He became a spectator of his own life, unable to change the script he had written for himself. As nights turned into days and days merged into a fog of confusion, Jake realized he needed to face reality. The encounter with Tom had shaken him, but it was also a wake-up call. The loss of control frightened him, and he found himself at a crossroads: continue sinking into alcohol or seek help. But the thought of admitting he needed support filled him with shame. He had always seen himself as strong, a pillar of security for his family and colleagues. What would happen if he revealed his vulnerability? Doubt consumed him. Meanwhile, Marcus Steele's struggle progressed. With Jessica's support, he began attracting more attention to his case. Community meetings became frequent, and Steele's passion for justice was contagious. He started to realize that his voice held power. With each speech he made, he felt he was not only fighting for his own freedom, but also for the freedom of many others facing discrimination. However, the pressure weighed. The fear of failure accompanied him, and he often wondered if he was up to the responsibility he had taken on. Jake's life was becoming increasingly complicated. Media pressure intensified, and his attempts to clean up his image were thwarted. A new scandal involving the police and allegations of abuse of power emerged, putting Jake back in the spotlight. He was portrayed as a symbol of everything wrong with the police force, and critical voices grew louder. Public outrage was palpable, and the pressure for him to speak out increased, but Jake felt paralyzed, unable to articulate his thoughts without exposing himself further to ridicule. At home, the situation was equally tense. Sarah, his ex-wife, didn't hesitate to expose his flaws to their children, and Jake felt that with each passing day, the distance between them grew. The disapproving looks from his children hurt him deeply, and he wondered if he would ever regain their trust. He tried to connect, but the words felt insufficient. The idea that he had become an example of what not to do haunted him. The feeling of failure as a father gnawed at him. Before we continue with this gripping story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories, and let us know which city you are watching this video from in the comments. Meanwhile, Tom didn't give up on Jake. He kept showing up at the bar, offering a helping hand even when Jake tried to push him away. Tom's insistence that Jake seek help began to have an effect. One day, in a heartfelt conversation, he shared his own story of overcoming, revealing how he had found support in a recovery group after leaving the police. Tom's words resonated with Jake, and he began to glimpse a way out, a possibility for change. On the other hand, Marcus's determination started to attract the attention of influential people. He was invited to participate in a panel on social justice, where he could share his story and fight for the change he wanted to see. Despite his nervousness, he knew he had a unique opportunity in his hands, but the pressure mounted. He questioned whether he was ready to be the spokesperson for so many. Doubt assailed him, and he wondered if he was prepared to handle the weight of expectations. Jake and Marcus's destinies were about to intersect in a way neither of them could foresee, their personal struggles intertwined, reflecting the divisions in society. Jake was approaching a breaking point, while Marcus was becoming a growing force of resistance. Each, in their own way, faced their limitations and sought redemption, but the path would not be easy. As Jake pondered his next move, the pressure from society and his personal life became unbearable. The weight of the choices he had made surrounded him, and he found himself staring into an abyss. The choice between surrendering to darkness or fighting for a new beginning became a matter of survival. The echoes of voices criticizing him and the memories of what he had lost propelled him forward, but the hope for a fresh start began to flicker, even if faintly, amidst the storm. The atmosphere in the city was tense, and the pressure on Jake McAllister increased with each passing day. He found himself at a breaking point, teetering between self-pity and the need for change. One night, as he was leaving a bar, something unexpected happened. Jake spotted a crowd gathered in front of the police station. The air was thick with emotion, and he felt an inexplicable urge to move closer. As he walked, the faces of people he knew, neighbors, co-workers, even former friends, came into view. They were all there protesting against what they considered injustices within the police force. Jake's heart raced. He felt a mix of shame and anger when he realized that through his own inaction, he had contributed to the pervasive distrust of the police. A part of him wanted to turn away, but another part tugged him closer, as if urging him to confront the ghosts that haunted him. In the midst of the turmoil, Jake heard a name being shouted repeatedly: Marcus Steele. He remembered the young activist who had started to gain notoriety. Marcus was becoming the voice of many, and his words resonated through the crowd. Something stirred within Jake. He saw the spark in Marcus's eyes, the determination radiating from him, and a burning desire for change. It was the same passion he once had, but now it felt distant and forgotten. Suddenly, Marcus climbed onto a small stool and began to speak. His voice was clear and powerful. He talked about the importance of accountability, truth, and the need to acknowledge the mistakes of the past. "We can only move forward when we have the courage to look back and confront our failures," he exclaimed, and the words hit Jake like a punch in the gut. He knew he had strayed from his true self, hiding behind a facade of pride and strength. Those words challenged everything he believed about himself. The crowd applauded, and Jake felt small. He remembered his life, how he had succumbed to alcohol, mistakes, and guilt. Marcus's revelation made him reconsider his choices. He realized he could no longer hide. If he wanted redemption, he would have to face his demons. As Marcus spoke, a wave of emotion washed over Jake. He was no longer a passive observer, but someone who needed to act. The fear of failure that once paralyzed him now motivated him. He thought of his children, how much he wanted to be a role model for them, how much he wanted to regain the trust he had lost. The idea of becoming a symbol of overcoming adversity, rather than a symbol of failure, began to form in his mind. Jake decided that this would be the moment of transformation. He felt the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He approached the crowd, not just as a former police officer, but as a man seeking redemption. When Marcus finished his speech, Jake felt compelled to speak. He didn't know exactly what he would say, but the urgency to do something outweighed the fear that paralyzed him. With his heart racing, he climbed onto the stool beside Marcus. The crowd turned to him, and he felt the weight of all those gazes. "I am Jake McAllister," he began, his voice trembling, "and I have failed. I have failed my family, my colleagues, and my community. I hid behind alcohol, distanced myself from the people I love most, and became part of the problem I so often criticize. But I am here today to say that I want to change." The words flowed from his mouth as if something inside him had been released. He spoke about his struggles, his insecurities, and his desire to seek help. The silence of the crowd was replaced by murmurs of empathy and support. Jake realized he was not alone. He saw familiar faces nodding, listening intently, and for the first time in a long time he felt a thread of hope. That moment was a turning point for Jake. He understood that true strength was not in hiding his weaknesses, but in accepting them and seeking a path of overcoming. There, in front of everyone, he decided he would enroll in a recovery group and fight to regain his children's trust. The road ahead would be difficult, but he was willing to face the challenges that lay ahead. As the crowd applauded, Jake felt a wave of relief and determination. He was no longer a spectator in his own life. He was ready to write a new script. The change he sought began within him, and with that a new journey commenced. After that decisive moment at the police station, Jake McAllister felt a profound change within himself. The adrenaline from his newfound courage still coursed through his veins, but soon reality set in. He knew the road ahead would be filled with obstacles. The first and most immediate consequence of his decision was the challenge of confronting his addiction. The idea of enrolling in a recovery group was a positive step, but the battle against the urge to drink was an ongoing struggle. In the days that followed, Jake faced temptation at every corner. He noticed that the places that used to be his refuges, like the bar where he used to spend his nights, were now becoming traps. The smell of alcohol and the laughter of friends drew him in, but he remembered Marcus's words, the crowd that supported him, and the commitment he had made to himself. He decided that to stay strong, he needed to create a new environment around him. Jake began attending the support group. In the first meetings, he felt out of place, surrounded by people who seemed to have heavier stories than his own. He heard accounts of lives destroyed by addiction, but instead of feeling inferior, he found a kind of strength in the vulnerability of everyone there. By sharing his own story, he realized that each person was fighting their own battles, and this made him feel part of something bigger. Gradually, Jake began to make friends with some of the group members. There was Maria, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile, and Tom, a young man who was also trying to rebuild his life after years of dependency. Conversations with them, both during meetings and outside of them, helped Jake stay motivated. They supported each other, and the feeling of community began to replace the loneliness he had felt for so long. However, it was not only the group meetings that challenged him. Upon returning home, Jake faced another battle, his relationship with his children. He had distanced himself from them during his years of inactivity, and now, as he tried to reconnect, he encountered the distrust and pain he had caused. The kids were hesitant, and he understood. He had promised so many things before and had failed. It was hard for them to believe that he could change. One night, Jake decided it was time for a meaningful gesture. He prepared a special dinner for his children, something they used to do together before his downfall. With a heavy heart, he invited them to the table. The food was delicious, but the atmosphere was tense. He saw the cautious glances from his children and felt the weight of the silence. It was a painful reminder of what he had lost. After some time, Jake decided he needed to speak. He said he knew he wasn't the father they deserved, but he was trying to change and wanted to be someone they could trust again. He saw his daughter Emma's eyes fill with tears, while his son Lucas looked down at his plate, clearly struggling with his emotions. Jake knew he couldn't expect them to forgive him immediately, but the sincerity of his words seemed to create a crack in the barrier that had formed between them. In the following days, he made an effort to show that he was committed. He took the kids for walks in the park, helped Emma with her homework, and made an effort to listen to Lucas about his interests. Each small gesture was a step, but Jake felt there was still a long way to go. In every shared laugh, there was also a shadow of doubt. He knew that trust wouldn't be rebuilt overnight. Meanwhile, external pressure continued to grow. The movement led by Marcus was gaining momentum, and tensions in the city were rising. Protests became more frequent, and Jake found himself torn. He wanted to support the cause, but he also feared that his presence there could be misinterpreted. There was a part of him that felt he was not yet worthy of standing alongside those fighting for change. On a particularly difficult day, Jake decided to go meet Marcus, who was organizing a new protest. He wanted to offer his help, but insecurity paralyzed him. As he approached, he felt the weight of expectations. What could he offer? However, upon seeing Marcus interacting with the young people and inspiring hope, something inside him reignited. He remembered the light in Marcus's eyes and the determination it had awakened in him. Jake stepped forward and with hesitation introduced himself. He expressed his desire to help, his voice firm, yet still tinged with nervousness. To his surprise, Marcus smiled and said they were all there to learn and grow, and that Jake's experience could be valuable. That acceptance was like balm for Jake's soul. He realized that even in his fragility, he could still contribute to something greater. Jake's journey was just beginning. The challenges were many, both internal and external, but he had a new purpose. The fight against his personal demons and the quest for reconciliation with his children now walked hand in hand with his desire to engage in the struggle for justice. He knew the road would be long, but he was determined to walk it, one step at a time. And for the first time in a long while, Jake felt that he was on the right path. Jake McAllister was facing a new chapter in his life. The decision to seek help and distance himself from addiction was not easy, but he felt that something had changed within him. In the early days, the struggle against temptation was intense. Every corner seemed like a trap. Every memory of a drink shared with friends echoed a past that insisted on returning. However, he remembered Marcus and everyone in the support group who encouraged him not to give up. The meetings became a refuge. There Jake felt understood, even though their stories were different. He heard tales of overcoming and pain, and gradually began to understand that he was not alone. By sharing his own experience, he noticed that his voice, once so unsure, became firmer with each meeting. He was learning to trust himself again, to accept that his journey had value. But the true battle was not just against alcohol, it was also about winning back his children. The dinner he prepared for them was a courageous step, but the silence that followed was deafening. Jake knew he had hurt his children, and that trust is not quickly rebuilt. He decided he needed to demonstrate, through actions, his commitment. Every trip to the park and every moment spent listening to Lucas and Emma were attempts to restore what had been lost. As time passed, Jake began to notice small changes. A shy smile from Emma at the end of a day of playing, or Lucas's glance that for a brief moment revealed curiosity about who his father was becoming. Those moments were precious, and although there was still distrust, there was also a thread of hope forming. Jake's life was also intertwined with the struggle for justice in the city. He felt the pressure of the increasingly frequent protests, and insecurity consumed him. How could he, who had failed so many times, join such an important cause? But seeing Marcus, the charismatic leader who inspired him to change, reminded Jake of what was at stake. He realized that his experience, even though marked by failures, could bring valuable lessons. When he offered to help Marcus, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The acceptance he received was a relief. Through collective struggle, Jake began to see that success was not measured only by material accomplishments, but by his ability to help others and become a better person. He was learning that personal growth was a form of wealth that no one could take away from him. Conversations with Maria and Tom, his new friends from the group, also helped him see life in a new light. Maria, with her wisdom and empathy, always reminded Jake that every step, no matter how small, was a victory. Tom, in turn, shared his own struggles, and together they reflected on the lessons they were learning. These bonds of friendship, unusual and unexpected, became a pillar in his journey of overcoming. Jake's transformation was not only internal. As he became more active in his community, he realized he could make a difference. He began to apply the lessons learned from his friends and the support group. What once was a burden was now becoming an opportunity for growth. He organized awareness events, spoke about his experience, and encouraged others to seek help as well. In the process, Jake not only healed himself but helped others find their way to recovery. The internal conflict that had haunted him began to dissipate. He learned to forgive himself for past failures and to see each day as a new chance. This new perspective not only freed him, but also allowed him to reconnect with his children in a more authentic way. Jake was becoming a more present, more attentive father, and gradually their trust was beginning to be restored. The challenges were still far from over, and he knew that the struggle against addiction and the efforts to regain his children's trust would be ongoing. But for the first time, Jake felt he was on the right path. He had found strength in adversity, learned the importance of vulnerability, and discovered that true success lies in the ability to rise after each fall. With every step taken, Jake McAllister was transforming not only into a better man, but into a father and friend that his family and community could count on. Jake McAllister was about to face the greatest challenge of his life, The day of the protest for justice in the city had arrived, and the pressure he felt was palpable. He had prepared for this moment, but insecurity still haunted him. The idea of speaking to a crowd, sharing his story and his struggle, made him nervous. And more than that, the weight he felt regarding his children tormented him. They were still recovering from his emotional absence. As he headed to the protest site, Jake recalled all the difficulties he had faced along his journey. The addiction, the pain of seeing his children drift away, the constant internal struggle between temptation and the desire to be a better man. His heart raced, and he wondered if he was really ready for this. Upon arrival, he saw people of all ages gathered, holding signs and shouting slogans. There was a vibrant energy in the air, but Jake felt like an intruder. He remembered Marcus, who always said that true change begins within us. Inspired by this, Jake took a deep breath and decided he could not give up. The expectation of the crowd made him tremble, but he knew he needed to stand up. When the moment to speak arrived, Jake felt paralyzed. He looked at the crowd, saw determined and hopeful faces, and for a moment, he felt that his words could make a difference. He thought of Emma and Lucas, and how they deserved a father who was strong and courageous. He began to speak, his voice initially hesitant, but soon firming up with emotion. "Hello, my name is Jake McAllister, and one day, I was a lost man. I let addiction take over my life, and with it, lost what I loved most, my children." The words came out with difficulty, but seeing some people in the crowd nodding their heads encouraged him. "I am not perfect. I made mistakes, and for a long time I thought there was no way back, but I am here to say that it is possible to start over." With each sentence, Jake felt his confidence grow. He shared his struggles, the support groups, the help from friends like Maria and Tom, and how those bonds helped him find the strength he didn't know he had. He spoke about how the journey was not easy, but each small step made a difference. The audience began to engage, and he saw emotional faces, people who were also facing their own battles. "Today, I am here not just for myself, but for all of us. We can all fight for a better world, for a better future for our children." The crowd began to applaud, and the energy intensified. He saw Marcus at the front with a smile of approval, which motivated him even more. Jake was transforming, not just into a man who had overcome his addiction, but into an advocate for change. However, amidst the excitement, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Lucas, his son, who was there with Emma by his side. Jake's heart raced. He hadn't realized that his children had followed him there. The fear of disappointing them nearly overwhelmed him, but he remembered what he had learned. Vulnerability is a form of strength. He looked at them, and in that moment, the connection that had been lost began to restore. "I want you to know, my children, that I am fighting for you. I want to be the father you deserve. I have made mistakes, but I am here, and I will not give up." Tears filled his eyes, and he saw Lucas's expression change, a mix of confusion and hope. Emma smiled, and that gave Jake the courage he needed. The crowd was silent, absorbing the emotion of that moment. Jake continued to speak, now with a renewed feeling. "Life is a journey of ups and downs, and we all face challenges, but together we can find a way. Let's fight not just for ourselves, but for those we love. Let's support each other and overcome our fears." When he finally finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Jake felt a vibrant warmth in his heart. He looked at his children, who were now approaching him. Lucas stepped forward and with a trembling voice said, "I am proud of you, Dad." Emma took Jake's hand, and in that moment everything seemed to fall into place. His son's words were the confirmation that his struggle had not been in vain. The demonstration turned into a moment of unity and hope. Jake realized that true wealth was not in material achievements, but in the relationships he built, and in the ability to connect with others. He had faced his greatest challenge, and in doing so, not only redeemed himself, but also rebuilt the bonds with his children. That day, Jake McAllister not only became a better man, but also a father and a friend that his family and community could rely on. He had learned that life is made of new beginnings, and every failure carries with it the opportunity to grow and become stronger. The future was still uncertain, but now Jake was sure that, with love and determination, he could face any challenge. After the demonstration, Jake McAllister felt a wave of relief and euphoria. He had managed to open his heart to the crowd, and the connection with his children filled him with a newfound determination. But as he walked towards the car, emotions began to mix with reality. What would happen now? The fight against addiction didn't end there, and reconnecting with Lucas and Emma was just the beginning of a longer journey. That night, Jake sat at the table with his children. The dinner was simple, but the atmosphere was charged with emotion. He looked at them, trying to find the right words. "I know I haven't been the father you deserved until now, but I am here, and I want to make this work." Lucas, who had been quieter than usual, looked at his plate, thoughtful. "Dad, are you really going to stay? And what if you go back to what you were?" The question cut deep into Jake. He knew Lucas's doubt was legitimate, and the possibility of failing again haunted him. "I understand how you feel, son." "I'm scared too," Jake replied, "but I am fighting for us. I've made tough decisions and I know it won't be easy, but I promise I will strive every day to be a better father." Emma, who had been silent until then, placed her hand on Jake's. "We believe in you, Dad. We saw you speaking out there. It was beautiful." Her words brought a smile to Jake's face, but he knew that promises were just that, promises, until they were fulfilled. As the days passed, Jake began to face the repercussions of his decision to expose himself at the demonstration. He received messages of support, but also criticism from people. Some members of the community couldn't forget the past, and that made him feel vulnerable. He remembered Marcus's words about how change always attracts resistance. However, he was stronger now and decided he wouldn't let criticism bring him down. He committed to attending support meetings, not just for himself, but also to help others going through similar battles. The stories he heard inspired him, and he began to feel part of something bigger. In those meetings, he saw fathers and mothers fighting for their children, just like him. This brought him a sense of community and belonging that he had previously lacked. At home, Jake and his children began to establish new routines. He tried to be more present, helping Lucas with homework and taking Emma to dance practice. Small things, but they made a big difference. One day, while watching a movie together, Lucas turned to Jake and said, "Dad, you're different, and I like that." His son's words were a sign that trust was beginning to be rebuilt. Later, on a quiet night, Jake sat on the couch with Emma. "Are you happy, dear?" he asked, worried about what might be going through her mind. Emma smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "I am, Dad, but I still miss how things used to be." Jake understood that recovery was not just about him, it was about the whole family. The pain of the past was still present and forgiveness would take time. "I miss it too, Emma. But I want you to know that I will work every day to make our future better. We will overcome this together," he replied, feeling his heart tighten. The conversation made him reflect on how much he still needed to learn and change. Weeks passed, and Jake began to realize that the path to recovery was filled with ups and downs. There were good days, where joy filled his home, and bad days, where doubt and fear threatened his peace. But with the support of his family and the community, he was determined not to give up. One night, while looking at the stars with Lucas and Emma, Jake felt a wave of gratitude. He had faced his greatest challenge and emerged on the other side. It was not just about overcoming addiction, but about being a present and loving father. He realized that true strength lay in his vulnerability, in admitting his shortcomings, and in fighting for a better future. Jake knew that the road ahead was still long, but he was ready to face it. With his children by his side and the support of the community, he finally felt he was where he was meant to be, at home. Jake looked at his children, Lucas and Emma, and felt warmth in his heart. The time they had spent together in recent weeks had not been easy, but gradually, he began to feel that the building of a new life was taking shape. He reflected on the journey he had traveled, from the moment he decided to confront his addiction to the days that followed, filled with challenges and victories. He realized that each small action, each moment of attention given to Lucas and Emma, was a form of repair. The trust that had once been lost was slowly being regained. There was a new understanding between them, a bond that grew stronger each day. Jake remembered his therapist's words, "Recovery is not a destination, but a journey," and he was starting to understand what that really meant. The criticisms that once shook him now motivated him. He became an advocate for recovery in the community, encouraging others to share their stories. In every meeting he attended, Jake saw the struggles of others and remembered his own battles. He realized he was not alone, and that by helping others, he was also helping himself. This connection with the community brought a sense of purpose he had never felt before. One night, while sitting at the dinner table with his children, Jake decided it was time to face something that troubled him, the pain of the past. He knew he needed to talk about his failures and how they had affected them. "I want you to know that I am here for you, but also because I want to forgive myself. I made bad choices, but that does not define who I am. I am fighting for a better future for us, he declared, his voice firm but full of emotion. Lucas, who had always been the more sensitive of the two, looked into his father's eyes. Dad, we just want you to be happy. If you are happy, we are too, Emma added, and we want you to know that we will always be here no matter what happens. Their words touched Jake deeply, and he knew that recovery was not just about his own struggle, but about the healing of the whole family. With this new determination, Jake decided it was time to take revenge on his past. He enrolled in a mentoring program, where he could help young people facing issues similar to those he had encountered. He wanted them to know that recovery was possible, that there was light at the end of the tunnel. In doing so, Jake was not only seeking redemption, but also transforming his pain into something positive, helping others not to walk the same path he had. With each young person he helped, Jake felt as if he were erasing a part of his past. He was rewriting his story, and that made him feel stronger. The revenge was not against the people who criticized him, but against the demons that had imprisoned him for so long, and by doing so he was freeing himself. Now looking at Lucas and Emma, Jake smiled. He knew the road was still full of challenges, but with each passing day he felt closer to who he truly wanted to be. True wealth was not in material possessions, but in the love and connection he had with his children and the community. Jake's message to everyone who listened to him was clear. Life is made up of new beginnings. Each person has the power to change their story, and no matter how difficult the path may be, there is always an opportunity to rise and fight again. He invited everyone to reflect on their own journeys and not to give up, sharing their stories and lessons learned. If you identified with this story, if you have faced challenges or know someone who is struggling, do not hesitate to share your experience in the comments. Every story matters, and yours could inspire someone to change. Together we can create a network of support and encouragement. The time is now.